Welcome back, guys, to Dark Night Scare. In today's episode, I'm sharing 10 true disturbing stories about the Appalachian deep woods. Encounters that will make you think twice before stepping into the deep woods alone. But before we begin, please consider subscribing and don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Let me know where you're watching from. Thank you all. Now let's start. I'm a software developer, and I often resort to solo backpacking to alleviate work stress. I focus mainly on remote areas within the Appalachian Mountains, where it's possible to hike for days without encountering another person. I meticulously plan my trips, studying topographic maps, reviewing weather forecasts, and always informing my brother of my destination and return time. This specific journey was intended to be a 3-day loop through a wilderness area in eastern Virginia. I had previously trekked similar paths without incident. The trailhead lay at the end of an unpaved road, several miles from the nearest town. I parked my car just after 5 p.m. on a Friday. The lot was deserted, save for an aging red truck that appeared to have been stationary for a while. Dust coated the windows, and at least one tire was flat. I noted it, but focused back on my preparations. I checked my pack, ensured I had my GPS and printed map, then locked the car. The first stretch of the trail was wide and easy, gradually climbing through a hardwood forest. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, and the buzz of late summer insects thrummed all around. Progress was smooth. I passed 2 trail markers and paused briefly to drink some water near a sizable rock outcropping that overlooked the slope below. Still, I saw no one. Only the usual sounds of birds and insects filled the air. I distinctly remember how peaceful it felt, a tranquility that's precisely what I sought. By Friday evening, I found a suitable camping spot after roughly 3 hours of hiking. It was a small clearing beside a creek enveloped by a thick forest, exactly the solitude and calmness I needed. I set up my tent, ate dinner, and was in my sleeping bag by 9 p.m. The night was calm aside from typical forest noises. I drifted off effortlessly, tired from the demanding week at work. Around 2 a.m., something disturbed my sleep. I heard hushed voices outside, low and cautious. Initially, I assumed fellow backpackers had arrived, yet something in the tone stirred my uneasiness. It didn't sound like a conversation. It was more whispering, steady and deliberate, lacking urgency. I lay still, straining to listen. The voices circled around me slowly, never close enough to decipher any words. I suspected there were perhaps 2 or 3 individuals present. There were no footsteps, no flashlight beams, nothing. I dared not unzip the tent. I remained patient, waiting. After about 5 minutes, the whispering ceased. I stayed still, not moving, attempting to hear anything else. Eventually, I must have drifted back to sleep because the next moment I knew, light filled the area. I got up, stepped outside and scanned the surroundings. Everything appeared undisturbed. No signs of others near the creek, no footprints, no broken branches. I was at a loss for thoughts. Maybe it was a dream. Yet, doubting that notion, I quickly dismissed the idea. Given my experience, I knew I hadn't had dreams like that out in the woods. While packing, I remained vigilant, continuously scanning the tree line. I distinctly sensed I was being watched. From my sleeping bag, I stayed perfectly still, clearly listening. It was confirmed. I could hear the distinct sounds of 2 men whispering to each other while moving around my campsite. I heard footsteps circling the tent and branches snapping as they took position. One of them remarked about ensuring I didn't scream, and my blood ran cold. They weren't fellow hikers. Their intentions were malicious. Slightly grasping my knife and headlamp, I slowly unzipped the back of my tent. Thank goodness I had positioned the tent to face thick brush in the back. I crawled out as quietly as I could manage and concealed myself behind a large boulder roughly 20 feet away. The voices drew closer to my previous location. My breaths were shallow as I clutched the knife's handle and waited. What I witnessed next still haunts me. 2 men wielding wooden clubs approached my tent from opposite sides. Both appeared young, maybe in their early 20s, moving with the confidence of individuals accustomed to such aggression. One wore a dark hoodie, while the other had a beanie pulled low over his face. Without a hint of warning, they began viciously attacking my tent with their clubs. They struck where my head and body would have been had I still been inside. The noise was horrendous. Wood cracking against aluminum poles and nylon fabric echoed in the night. They hit relentlessly for at least a minute, grunting with exertion as they swung wildly. The tent collapsed quickly, yet they did not relent. They continued pummeling the crumpled form, as if ensuring I was lifeless. My hands trembled so much that I could barely keep hold of my knife. I crouched low, trying to remain silent. A wave of nausea washed over me. I realized their intent was to end my life while I slept. If I hadn't awakened, I wouldn't have survived the night. As they focused on demolishing my tent, I stealthily retreated deeper into the woods, needing to reach the parking area and my car, which lay 3 miles away. I dared not use my flashlight, relying instead on the moonlight, while moving with utmost caution through the underbrush. Every snapping twig or sudden gust of wind made me freeze, gnawing at the nagging fear of them discovering I had escaped my tent. A few times, I thought I heard noises behind me, branches shifting unnaturally, but I didn't dare look back. I just kept moving. My boots touched the ground almost soundlessly on the pine needles. I avoided stepping on anything that might crack and aid in revealing my presence. The trail was faint, scarcely visible in the dark, yet I relied on my memory to guide me. I walked, hunched low, heart racing, gripping my knife tightly the whole time. It took an exhausting 6 hours to reach the trailhead without a break. When I finally caught sight of my car through the trees, I almost collapsed to my knees. Unlocking the door, I climbed in and secured everything. I paused momentarily, resting my hand on the ignition and dreading the sound of approaching footsteps or the sight of a shadow looming behind me. But nothing. I turned the engine and sped away, gravel spraying beneath the tires as I exited the area in haste. I didn't stop until I reached the state police barracks an hour later. Walking in, I remained in my dirty clothes, eyes bleary, knife still clutched tightly. I relayed my entire ordeal. The officers were attentive and took my concerns to heart. I provided them with the GPS coordinates, descriptions of my attackers, and every detail I could recollect. Within the hour, they dispatched a search team. Later that day, they reported that my campsite had been ransacked, tent destroyed, footprints everywhere. Nevertheless, no sign of the men, no blood, no tracks from a getaway vehicle. It appeared their intent wasn't to rob, but merely to inflict harm. I still take to the trails for backpacking, but no longer alone. It's a group endeavor now. I no longer set up camp near trailheads, nor do I hike late in the day. I carry a GPS tracker that updates my position hourly, and I can't afford to sleep deeply when out in the wild. The notion of being alone in the woods with someone like that lurking nearby remains too overwhelming. I used to love the tranquility of nature, but now the silence in the forest serves as a grim reminder of how easily one can be watched without awareness. In 2019, my husband David and I were frequent hikers in Redwood National Park. While we weren't extreme hikers by any means, we were familiar with most of the trails and made it a habit to venture out in the evenings around 5 or 6. The light filtered beautifully through the trees during that time, and there were usually fewer people around. On one Thursday in early September, however, the park felt unusually quiet. There was maybe one other car in the gravel lot when we parked. This was slightly odd for a weekday, prompting me to joke to David about being the last 2 people on Earth. We commenced walking along one of the deeper forest trails that veered away from the more crowded, scenic routes. About 15 minutes in, we encountered a man approaching us on the narrow dirt path. He appeared to be in his 40s, dressed in a full business suit, with a dark jacket, a white shirt, and a silk tie. He wore shiny leather dress shoes, totally inappropriate for this type of terrain, which showed signs of wear and dirt, suggesting he had been walking for a while. Despite the appearance of being relatively clean and composed, he didn't seem sweaty or out of breath. He was constantly looking around, peering behind trees and glancing off to the sides of the path, as if he was searching for something or waiting for someone. We nodded as we passed by, and he nodded back without a smile or any words, continuing onwards as if we were mere background noise. Once we were out of earshot, David raised his eyebrows and commented, "Weird, right?" I nodded, though I remained silent as something about that man unsettled me. It wasn't a loud warning, just a quiet itch at the back of my mind. His jittery demeanor seemed too anxious, too distracted for a casual stroll. We walked for another half hour in silence, and as we ventured further, the woods became noticeably quieter. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of our boots on the dirt and the occasional creaking of branches. It was nearing 6 o'clock now, and the sun was lowering, casting an eerie blue-grey tint over the forest just before dusk. We reached a fork in the trail. The left path led back toward the parking lot while the right wound deeper into the woods. We typically chose the left trail, but this time, the man in the suit stood at the junction without having emerged from either direction. He was just there, in the center of the Y-shaped section, staring at his phone as if he had been waiting. This time, he carried a large backpack that looked military-issue or camping style, crafted from heavy-duty canvas. As we approached, I caught sight of something metallic protruding from the side pocket. It resembled a knife handle or possibly a multi-tool. My pace slackened slightly as David asked casually, "Hey, you okay? Need directions?" The man didn't respond immediately and only raised his gaze after a moment. When he finally replied, his voice trembled slightly. "No, I'm good. Just waiting for a friend," he stated, glancing down at his phone as he spoke without making eye contact. With a silent agreement, David and I turned left at the fork, just as the man indicated he would go right without moving from his spot. After walking about 10 steps down the trail, I picked up on another sound. Footsteps on the dirt, faint yet deliberate. I stopped, and David turned as well. The footsteps halted too. David whispered, "You hear that?" I simply nodded. We moved on, but at a slower pace this time. I glanced back after a minute, but saw no sign of the man. The trail remained narrow, flanked by towering redwoods and ferns that bent towards us like curtains. Visibility was limited to maybe 30 feet in any direction. Every few seconds, I thought I heard another step trailing behind us, one at a time, as if someone was stealthily matching our rhythm just out of sight. David suggested we speed up, and we did, quickening our pace but not quite running, our breaths becoming louder with the exertion. As the forest grew darker and the light dissipated rapidly, we stopped periodically to listen for anything behind us. Every time it was silence. Then, we heard the distinct snap of a branch about 20 feet behind us, not the crack of a lightweight twig, but a hefty branch. It sounded as if someone had stepped down on it with full weight. David spun around and called out, "Hey, who's there?" But no reply came. Fear took hold of him, and pulling out a small flashlight, he directed it back toward where we had just been. The beam caught nothing but trees and shadows. "Let's just go now," I urged, feeling an unease settle over us. We picked up pace but didn't run, just hurried along the path with steadily quickened steps, feeling the incline beneath our feet. After several minutes, we came to a ridge that overlooked the parking lot, and my knees turned weak from the hope of reaching safety. We scanned behind us but saw nothing. We continued on, the last 2 minutes down the slope without hearing anything further. However, when we reached the gravel lot, I cast one final glance back at the trail behind us. Though there was nothing visible at the tree line, where the forest intermingled with the parking area, I spotted a single footprint pressing into the dust, fresh and deep, indicating someone had recently stood there. Turning to face David, I noticed the same man from earlier following us down the left path, despite having claimed he was heading right. He no longer seemed to care about concealing himself. His footsteps were measured and exact, and his posture, now more upright, exuded control and intention. David noticed at the same moment and leaned toward me as we hurried our pace. We didn't run, but we didn't converse either. My backpack thumped against me with each step while I gripped the strap tightly. The sounds behind us consisted solely of his boots crunching on dirt and fallen leaves. Each subtle curve in the trail raised my hopes that he wouldn't be there when I looked back. But every time, he remained in close pursuit, about 20 feet behind, moving at the exact speed we were. After a few minutes, we finally reached a broader stretch of the trail, a slight downhill section leading to an open area with a bench and a small wooden bridge. Ahead, a group of 3 hikers approached, 2 women and a man, chatting and laughing while wielding hiking poles. I could see David relax a fraction when he spotted them. The instant the man behind us noticed the hikers, he slowed to a halt and then turned, retracing his steps into the woods without hesitation. He walked away with no glances over his shoulder, as though he had only desired to pursue us when we were alone. David and I exchanged no words, just continued walking past the group of hikers with nods, crossing the bridge in silence. I can't recall much from the remainder of that trail other than my strong urge to escape the forest. When we arrived back at the vehicle, the parking lot was almost empty once more, those familiar echoes surrounding us. We entered and locked the doors without uttering a sound as David started the car and drove off without discussing what had just occurred. We remained in silence throughout the entire return journey, each immersed in our own thoughts, reflecting on the same series of events. 2 years later, we attended a barbecue in mid-July, surrounded by folding chairs in a vibrant backyard filled with children playing and the delectable scent of grilled food wafting through the air, David and I didn't know most of the attendees, who were mainly friends of friends. At one point, we found ourselves near the cooler with two guys introducing themselves as volunteers for the park service, swapping stories about their experiences on the trails and the craziest things they had witnessed. One of them, a man in his 50s wearing a faded ranger hat, recounted an incident that instantly grabbed my attention, stating, "You wouldn't believe half the things that happen out there. We had this one guy a few years back, 2019 I think, who escaped from a psychiatric facility in Crescent City and managed to make his way into the park. He explained that the man was dangerous and had robbed an elderly couple not far from the boundary, tying them up and taking their belongings, including their clothes, cash, and even a pair of dress shoes. He had walked the trails for several days, seeking victims to target and hoping to abduct someone to take with him." I felt immobilized. The air around me grew thick and tense as I stole a glance at David, who had frozen mid-sip, a can of beer stagnant in his grasp. The volunteer rambled on, blissfully ignorant of our mounting unease. "People have spotted him too, just walking around like a typical hiker. Full suit, nice watch, and shoes so caked in mud," he continued, chuckling as if it were merely entertaining to recount. He claimed he was waiting for someone. Neither of us responded. Instead, we began to back away slowly, drifting toward the fence marking the edge of the yard. We lingered there in silence for a moment before I finally asked, "Do you think that was him?" David simply nodded, acknowledging the dreadful possibility. That night, when we returned home, we searched for news articles. Though the information was sparse, it stated a man had been arrested in late 2019 after escaping from a psychiatric lockup. They found him in Redwood National Park, armed and deemed dangerous, but he was taken into custody without any incidents, no names, no photographs available. The next morning, we contacted the Park Service, doubting the effectiveness of reporting an event that had taken place 2 years prior. Yet, we hoped to have it documented. We provided extensive descriptions of the man's appearance, peculiar behavior, and his tendency to trail us until other hikers showed up. The person on the other end took our accounts seriously, instructing us to email a written report. After that, we never received any further communication. Sometimes, I find myself trying to convince myself that he was merely watching, perhaps seeking to scare us, with no real intentions behind it. But when I think back to how he transformed into someone more menacing as soon as we found ourselves alone together, and how he pursued us just closely enough until visibility arrived in the form of other hikers, it rattles me. We were fortunate, that's merely what it was, a simple stroke of luck. Had we remained for 5 more minutes, the outcome could have been drastically different. Now, when we hike, we stay close to larger groups, carry pepper spray, and choose the more traveled trails. Most importantly, I always glance behind me, particularly near forks and narrow bends, because sometimes the most terrifying threats aren't the wildlife or cliffs, but the man in the suit, walking too quietly, watching too intently, while claiming he's only waiting for a friend. At 17, I embarked on a day hike with my cousin Lucas and his girlfriend Sarah to visit a waterfall in the North Carolina mountains. It was one of those well-known locations not too far from Asheville, featuring a trail that weaved through pine forests, gradually climbing to an overlook complete with a wooden fence and a small clearing to enjoy a meal. We parked in the gravel lot at 8 a.m., just as the sun began to crest the ridges. The air was cool, still holding some dampness from the night. Birdsong echoed through the trees. Lucas was particularly excited. Having just acquired a new camera with a detachable lens, he claimed this waterfall would be a perfect first shoot. Sarah had packed a tiny backpack filled with sandwiches, trail mix, and water bottles, far more organized than either Lucas or I as we made our ascent. The path measured approximately 3 miles in length and was primarily dirt, sprinkled with occasional rocks. Every so often, we encountered other hikers, couples with dogs, older individuals with walking sticks, and even a group of college students jamming to music from a Bluetooth speaker. Overall, it just felt like another ordinary weekend hike. There were no unusual vibes, no sense of isolation. Everything felt merely normal. We took breaks a few times to allow Lucas to capture photos of tree trunks, small critters, or patches of moss-covered boulders. Sarah would usually roll her eyes and check her phone for a signal that often failed us. After about 2 hours of hiking, we arrived at the top, where the trail opened up to a spacious overlook featuring a wooden railing and a spectacular view of the valley below. The waterfall, while not vast, was a strong cascade plummeting down a rocky wall approximately 50 feet high. It was loud and enchanting, with mist spraying across the viewing area. We found a level spot slightly off the main overlook where the dirt transitioned to smooth rock shaded by tall trees. We laid out a towel, kicked off our shoes, and sat down to enjoy our meal. Lucas snapped almost 100 more photos as Sarah started distributing sandwiches. A handful of people were still present. Some stood by the railing, others continued hiking, but it wasn't crowded. It felt serene, like we occupied our own little pocket of tranquility. While we dined, the sound of coyotes howling drifted through the valley. Initially, it came in like a distant call, but soon multiple voices joined in, producing sharp, high-pitched yelps from various directions. It was an orchestra I had never experienced before. Lucas and I exchanged looks, paused mid-bite. Sarah halted in unwrapping her granola bar and inquired apprehensively whether that was normal. I responded, "Yeah, they practically live in these hills." Yet I couldn't recall ever hearing such a chorus, particularly during daylight hours. The calls didn't seem overly close, but the echoing in the mountains made it difficult to gauge. Lucas scanned the surroundings and suggested, "We should probably start heading back soon. Coyotes tend to be more active in the late afternoon, right?" He aimed the remark mainly at Sarah, who nodded and began stuffing wrappers back into her pack. I didn't counter his suggestion. Something about the way the howls echoed felt wrong. Not exactly fear, more like an instinctive alertness, akin to when the woods grow abruptly quiet. However, we were not entirely alone on the trail, and it was still just past 1 p.m., so I assumed we had time to spare. We all rose to gather our belongings when suddenly Lucas came to a halt. "Crap," he exclaimed. I left my camera back at the viewing area. I think I set it down on the stone wall. It was merely a quarter-mile back, not far, just a couple of turns downhill. Sarah proposed they retrieve it together, asserting they would be quick about it. With a friendly smile, she tossed her backpack to me. "Just hang tight here and watch our stuff. We shouldn't be gone for more than 20 minutes, Lucas chimed in, suggesting, "If any hikers come through, maybe let them know about the coyotes just in case." I nodded, settling back down on the towel. Once they left, the overlook felt a touch quieter. I could still hear birds and the waterfall, but the howling lingered in my thoughts. I glanced towards the trail now and then, anticipating their return around the bend. Checking my phone proved fruitless. No signal was available. Not a substantial concern, so I leaned against a tree trunk, attempting to relax while listening for voices or footfalls. Silence persisted, the plastic wrappers in the backpack beside me rustling faintly. Roughly 10 minutes after their departure, I found myself sitting on a rock, gazing out over the valley, trying to stave off rising anxiety. I fidgeted with a zipper on Sarah's backpack when soft crunching registered on the trail behind me. Slow, heavy steps. I stood, expecting Lucas and Sarah or perhaps another couple passing by, but met only unsettling stillness. There he was, a man standing roughly 30 feet away, just beyond the bend in the trail, frozen in place under a towering pine, staring directly at me. His appearance was disheveled. Filthy clothes hung loosely from his frame, torn and grey with deep stains. His pants were significantly short, revealing thin ankles and tattered hiking boots that barely stayed intact. His face was pallid and strained, as if he'd gone a long time without adequate nutrition. The most disconcerting detail was the unblinking gaze he fixed on me. I gave a quick nod and pushed out a greeting. "Hey, are you okay?" My voice sounded too small, almost too bright in the quiet. Not emotion, nor a word came from him, just that unwavering stare. Hoping he simply hadn't heard me, I raised my voice slightly and asked again, "Do you need help?" "Water!" But he stood utterly still, exuding an unnerving aura. The lack of response made my stomach turn, leading me to stay put, not advancing and only waiting. Looking downward for a moment, filling time, I glanced back at him. He remained unchanged. I inquired once more if he required anything, water, food, or help finding the trailhead. Suddenly, he opened his mouth wide, unleashing a drawn-out howl that rang in perfect mimicry of the coyotes we'd heard earlier. Everything about that sound mirrored the previous howls. The pitch, rhythm, the rise and fall, all identical. He lingered there, head tilted back, howling skyward like a wild animal. I instinctively stepped back, heart racing. The howl reverberated through the valley, echoing off the surrounding walls. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, silence enveloped the forest once again. He gradually lowered his head and resumed fixing his gaze on me, devoid of expression or indication of awareness regarding the sound he had just made. I couldn't fathom what he intended, but sticking around to find out seemed unwise. Taking hold of Sarah's backpack, I draped it over one shoulder and cautiously retreated, doubling back slowly, trying to stay calm and collected while avoiding any hints of fear. Though he remained stationary, I was keenly aware of his watchful presence, just waiting for me to make a wrong move, backing away until the trail curved enough to obfuscate him. I hastened my pace, half walking and half jogging toward the next grouping of trees. I took a final look over my shoulder, but he had vanished completely. No sound, no scent, no movement. I had no idea how long I lingered there alone. Yet every sound in the woods seemed distorted now. A branch snapping, a bird flitting overhead. Everything felt overly pronounced. I refused to sit again. My stance remained vigilant, scanning the trees endlessly, heart hammering, ears straining. When Lucas and Sarah finally appeared on the trail, I nearly shouted their names. They were speaking casually, but upon catching sight of my face, they stopped abruptly. Lucas repeatedly inquired as to what happened, and I wasted no time sharing the unnerving details. How that man had appeared, his unyielding stare, and particularly the howl. Sarah's eyes widened, while Lucas bombarded me with questions. Was he under the influence? Homeless? Perhaps just lost? Uneasiness settled over us as we all gazed down the trail in the direction I had last seen him. But only the empty woods bore witness. Lucas advocated for alerting the rangers, yet we found ourselves without a signal, thus agreeing to descend the trail as swiftly as possible. We didn't dilly-dally. The descent felt doubly prolonged, every step suffused with tension. I was hyper-vigilant, checking behind us, minutely scrutinizing the woods, analyzing the ridgelines for signs of movement. We passed two separate groups of hikers. Sarah warned them to keep an eye out for a man who might need assistance, potentially suffering from exposure, but she also subtly cautioned them to maintain their distance if he acted erratically. Confusion clouded each nod they gave us, yet they took her warnings seriously. Finally making it to the parking lot, I felt as if I had been holding my breath throughout the entire journey back. We headed straight to the ranger station at the trailhead, and Lucas provided a detailed description. Male, likely mid-40s, around 6 feet tall, extremely thin, filthy, unresponsive to questions, and capable of mimicking coyote howls. The ranger didn't seem surprised. This was possibly worse than had he shown any sign of shock. He advised that they would dispatch someone to investigate that portion of the trail, but cautioned us that people like him sometimes lived in the forest for extended periods, dodging contact with others. I didn't contribute much during our drive home. Sarah sat in the back, persistently questioning the nature of the howl, agreeing with my perspective. It felt too perfect, too rehearsed, as if someone had trained to master it, owning the sound. We fell silent, driving down the road that wound away from the mountain. Guilt lingered with me. Even today I reflect on that man, how he remained emotionless like he didn't recognize me as a person, how he stood there waiting until I was momentarily isolated. I may never decipher whether he had intentionally tracked me or if it were mere coincidence. Also, I will always ponder why he hadn't moved, why he allowed me to walk away. Maybe he was merely trying to scare me, or perhaps he awaited something more. A friend of mine, Darren, had an uncle who owned a long, narrow stretch of land nestled within the Appalachian woods. He referred to it as a serene place to clear one's head, but it wasn't a campsite, not in the traditional sense. There were 4 of us, me, Darren, Kyle, and Jen, each of us around the same age, having just graduated high school and navigating that peculiar in-between phase where nothing felt permanent. So when Darren proposed a weekend off-grid, devoid of phones and distractions, it sounded ideal. A little reset before life caught up with us. The first day unfolded with an exhilarating recklessness. We were loud, laughter echoing as we stumbled over one another while setting up tents. Jen somehow managed to pitch hers upside down initially, claiming it was a creative choice. We gathered dry branches from the edge of the clearing, built a smoky fire, and roasted hot dogs on barely clean sticks. The taste of ash and mustard lingered on our tongues, but it didn't matter. The woods felt vast, but not menacing, more like a huge green canvas for our weekend retreat. By the second day, an unsettling shift settled over us. It began with something minor. I headed down to the creek streaming through the property to fill our water jug. Maybe a 5-minute venture, tops. Having already made the trip that morning, I didn't even think twice about it. I followed the trail we had carved out and returned promptly. Yet upon stepping back into the clearing, something felt amiss. My tent had vanished. Just gone. I halted in my tracks, blinking as though I was scanning the wrong part of the clearing. I walked around looking behind trees, retracing my steps to the exact spot where it had been set up, searching for any signs. A collapsed fabric, broken poles, but nothing. Just bare ground as if it had never existed. For a moment, I thought perhaps someone was playing a prank on me. Half laughing, half serious, I called out for the others. Darren emerged from his tent, rubbing his eyes, while the others looked perplexed. Kyle restrained a grin, trying not to laugh, yet they all assured me they hadn't touched it. They hadn't even left the clearing. We fanned out slightly into the trees, calling and checking for clues. Maybe it had blown away. Perhaps a bear had dragged it off. Who knew? Then Kyle let out a sharp, clipped shout that sliced through the calm. We found it. My tent, standing upright and perfectly zipped, about 50 yards deeper into the woods, not damaged or dragged there, just sitting there as if someone had lifted it entirely and walked it over. Everything inside was as I had left it, even my pillow still slightly crumpled from an earlier nap. We stood in silence, staring until someone, possibly Jen, let out a dry chuckle, one that screamed, "This is peculiar, but if we pretend it's amusing, maybe we won't get freaked out." We all joined in somewhat reluctantly, our gazes darting away from one another. None of us dared to voice what we were pondering, that perhaps something uninvited had moved my entire tent and set it up like nothing had happened. We dragged it back to our clearing, placing it in the exact same spot. That night, however, we found ourselves huddled closer to the fire than before. Conversation quickly fizzled out, not because we were exhausted, but because we felt uneasy. The fire cracked and popped, sending smoke into the trees. The enveloping darkness felt denser than it had the previous night. Not thick perhaps, but heavy, as if it leaned in to listen closer. Then a log split. A sharp crack rung out like a gunshot. I jumped to readjust it into the fire pit. Still crouching, I noticed it. Another chair sitting within our circle. It was a folding chair, featuring a thin metal frame and this faded burgundy cushion, reminiscent of those found in a church basement or school gymnasium. I froze, casting a glance at the others. Silence enveloped us. No one spoke. They also stared at the chair. None of us had brought it. No one owned a chair like that. It sat there as if someone had just gotten up for a moment, angled toward the flames with deliberate intention. No movement occurred. I scanned the trees, straining my ears for any signs of life, yet nothing. No wind rustling through leaves. The woods were utterly silent. No insects, no birds, only the low hiss of the fire and the sound of my own breathing quickening. I suggested we leave immediately, packing what we could and making a run for the car, even in the dark, but they hesitated. Darren feared getting lost. Jen suggested we wait for sunrise. Kyle kept glancing at the chair as if anticipating it to do something. We whispered in hushed tones, careful to not disturb anything ominous stirring nearby. In the end, we opted to stay, carefully avoiding the chair's gaze, trying not to acknowledge we were sharing our circle with something unwelcome. Eventually, we settled into our tents. Though sleep remained elusive, I lay awake, staring at the tent ceiling, my skin crawling. I felt watched, not in a paranoid sense, not as if my mind was playing tricks on me, but specific and focused, like something lingered just outside the fabric, perhaps kneeling and breathing quietly. In the middle of the night, I reached for my backpack. I always kept it zipped shut beside my sleeping bag, within arm's reach. But this time, it wasn't there. I froze, sat up cautiously, scanning the tent with my flashlight. It was empty, just my sleeping bag and a few crumpled clothes. I unzipped the door and stepped into the clearing, my flashlight beam jittering from my quivering hand. There they were, all 4 of our backpacks, neatly aligned side by side, propped upright against a tree, perfectly arranged. Each one zipped closed and facing the clearing as if they awaited examination. My throat went dry. Behind me, I heard the zippers of the others' tents. One by one, they emerged into the night. We said nothing, simply stood there, transfixed by the rolled backpacks, which now seemed sacred. Touching one would surely be a mistake. Eventually, Jen whispered, "Did someone?" but didn't finish her thought. We already comprehended the answer. We stayed awake until dawn, eyes heavy, shoulders tense, maintaining watch on that tree as if it could do something else. As the sky brightened, we didn't talk much, gathering only our essentials, phones, wallets, car keys, leaving everything else behind, forfeiting our gear. We wouldn't even try to dismantle the tents. We just quickened our pace, no breaks taken. The trail stretched longer than we remembered, the routes sharper, the slopes steeper. None of us dared to look back. When we reached the road and spotted Darren's car parked where we left it, I nearly broke down. The air felt different on this side of the tree line, like it had finally begun to breathe again. We climbed in without uttering a word, driving in silence until we caught sight of a gas station. Only then did someone exhale. None of us ventured back after that. We don't discuss it, not really, not even in group chats or jokingly. It feels like voicing it could grant permission. People are quick to regale stories about those mountains, declaring they're ancient, older than memory, that the land holds on to what people have forgotten. Maybe it's true, maybe it isn't. All I know is I left everything behind and walked away. That was the only choice I had. I was 20 when I took a summer job with a land survey company focused on forgotten properties, old plots hidden deep in the Appalachian backwoods. My primary responsibility was to hike to remote property edges, many of which hadn't been checked in decades. I would log coordinates, snap photos, and then move on. The company was small and based in a town most people have never heard of, Wickler, I believe. The man who hired me was the sort who rarely spoke, simply handing over field assignments with a staple printout and a nod. I didn't mind. I enjoyed the quiet and appreciated that I was earning decent money to wander through places so overrun by nature they barely recalled human existence. That feeling of being the first person in years, perhaps decades, to tread through a specific patch of land held a peculiar allure. That morning, I departed before sunrise, driving past the last gas station and through two towns with far more boarded windows than open ones. The paved roads eventually transitioned to gravel, which turned into dirt, winding between hills that grew steeper and more constricted as I ventured further. By the time the road finished, I found myself deep enough in that even the GPS's signal flickered. I parked my truck in a little clearing clearly used before, flat enough for tires with sun-bleached beer cans littering the weeds, and locked it behind me. The assignment was straightforward. I needed to follow a narrow creek listed on the topo map as Little Weaver for about 3 miles. At the end was an old iron boundary marker set back from the water. Simply photograph it, log the coordinates, and head back. They had relayed there were no existing structures out there, no cabins, no maintained trails, just dense forest, a place even hunters had abandoned long ago. I started off in good spirits. The weather was pleasant, my pack wasn't too heavy, and I appreciated having the creek as a natural guide. It flowed along my left side as I moved uphill and east, its gurgling sound oddly comforting. I remember the trees feeling dense, yet not oppressive. Not just yet. After perhaps an hour of walking, I paused here and there to check my map, ensuring I hadn't strayed off course. But then, something about the creek caught my eye. It's difficult to explain, but something seemed off. It felt like the current was syncing with my movements. When I walked faster, it rushed quicker, but when I slowed, it almost lagged behind. I convinced myself it was merely an illusion, a trick of the eye, or perhaps the terrain giving off a strange impression. But still, I pulled out my compass to double check. The needle wobbled, not spinning wildly, not broken, but twitching. It danced in place as if unsure which direction to point. I set it down upon a rock, wondering whether my body was interfering, yet no luck. It continued to quiver. I assumed perhaps there was iron in the soil, or something similar. Mountains do peculiar things to magnetic fields, right? I pressed on, assuring myself I would quickly reach the marker. That's when I spotted the first tree, standing just off the creek with its bark peeling away in grey strips. Initially, I thought someone had carved initials, or perhaps left a message, but upon closer inspection, I noticed they were merely tallies. Straight vertical lines scattered up the trunk with no discernible pattern. Some appeared shallow and old, faded into the bark. Others were fresh, sharp, with sap still glistening along the edges. It made me uneasy. Not because they were present, but due to the deliberate appearance they possessed. Nothing about them seemed random, as if someone had been keeping a count. I didn't want to consider what that could signify. Continuing my walk for another 100 feet, I came across another tree, sporting the identical markings, but in greater quantity. Then a third one that boasted even more. It felt like I was tracing someone's ongoing tally, delving deeper into the woods with each incision from the blade. The air began to feel thicker, a weighty presence clinging to me. Shaking it off, I told myself to concentrate. I'd come too far to turn back without completing the assignment. My feet began to hit patches of ground that felt unhealthily soft, as though I was walking atop hidden layers. And then the land dipped abruptly, deeper than indicated on the map. I expected a gentle slope, yet found myself stepping down into a hollow. That was when I noticed the rocks. They jutted from the earth like broken teeth, arranged in a square, rough and uneven but too orderly to be natural. Initially, I believed they were merely old stones, perhaps remnants of a collapsed wall. But as I scrutinized them more closely, their resemblance to the outline of a foundation became apparent. Whatever had stood there was now gone. No wood, no metal, merely the shape remained. Then I saw the boots. Within the stone square, 4 pairs of worn and weather-beaten boots neatly lined up side by side, upright. They weren't randomly discarded or haphazardly tossed. They had been carefully placed there, all toes pointing forward, as if arranged by someone. I stared for too long until I noticed others behind me. Half buried beneath leaves, I caught a glimpse of a child-sized pair, and further back, others of varying sizes, different styles, all similarly aged. Not fresh, but not so decayed that leather would usually become after years outdoors. My scalp prickled with unease, slowly creeping in, but refusing to release its grip. I stepped back, unsure what I had stumbled upon, but I couldn't leave yet. I hadn't yet found the marker. Turning to follow the creek once more, I suddenly questioned if I was even heading in the same direction anymore. The trees had shifted. I recognized a fallen log I had previously passed, only now it was split down the center. A break that certainly hadn't existed before. At this point, my map could have been a random sketch. None of it matched reality, and just as I drew close to turning back, I spotted a roofline through the trees. There stood a cabin, not marked on the map, not mentioned among my job notes. It leaned slightly, darkened by age and rain, possessing no windows, just 2 square holes where they likely used to be. No door either, merely the frame. No indication of smoke or human activity. I should have turned away. Every instinct told me so, yet I approached. I called out a simple hello, feeling foolish as my voice resonated too loudly. No response followed, not from humans nor wildlife, nor even the creek. The floor creaked underfoot, yet it remained intact. A smell hit me instantly. Damp wood, mildew, something metallic lingering faintly. The floor itself was carpeted with clothing. Not just a shirt here or there, but layers upon layers, folded jackets and trousers slumped in corners, old coats hanging limp off nails. None of it seemed recent. Wool vests, plaid patterns, high collars, items out of black and white photographs from decades ago. I felt as if I were stepping into a closet frozen in time. Then I spotted the names, carved into the walls. They weren't scratched, but carved deep, deliberately. Mostly first names, some repeated 2 or 3 times, while others were unfinished. Knife strokes abruptly ending mid-letter. Hundreds of names cluttered the surface so that some boards had no space left. I remember trailing my gaze along the names, hoping to discern a pattern as I considered whether there was some sort of list or meaning behind them. Then I heard the faintest shift behind me. When I turned, she was standing there in the doorway. I'm unsure how to describe her without sounding insane. She appeared as a woman, tall, wearing a pale dress, long black hair cascading down straight. Yet she didn't seem entirely real. She was still, didn't speak, just tilted her head slightly as if listening for something. Her arms hung loosely, palms facing me. There was nothing overtly threatening about her position, which somehow made it worse. I locked up, unable to breathe or blink. I simply stared. Then an instinct kicked in, and I bolted. I ran straight past her through the doorway, half expecting to feel cold fingers brush against my skin. Yet there was nothing. The trees closed in around me once again. I crashed through branches, tripped over roots, scraped my arms and face, but I didn't stop. My ears were tuned to the creek's sound, my only reliable guide. The compass on my chest wobbled, its needle spinning wildly like it had given up. After what felt like hours, but in reality was likely just minutes, I broke through the tree line and stumbled into the clearing. My truck remained where I left it, sunlight glinting off the hood as if it belonged to another world. I tossed my backpack into the bed, not bothering to check what fell out. My hands trembled so much that I dropped my keys the first time I tried to grab them. I successfully obtained them the second time and took off so fast that I left a cloud of dust behind. 10 minutes into climbing the ridge, my phone buzzed back to life with one bar. A connection was made. I called the office, informing them I was done. I didn't care about the money and had no desire for another assignment. I didn't offer an explanation. I simply hung up and kept driving. This incident happened around 2 years ago when I was still locked into 12-hour shifts at Denver General. In an effort to manage my stress, I gravitated towards running, with my favorite location being a national park, roughly 30 minutes from my apartment. I frequented this 5-mile loop trail twice a week, always finding it quiet, frequented mostly by locals and devoid of tourists, and the parking lot typically hosted a mere 6 or 7 cars. On that Tuesday morning, the weather was clear and dry, albeit a bit chilly, perfect for a long run. I pulled into the lot around 9:40 a.m., just after the frost finished melting away in the morning sunlight. Only 3 other vehicles were around. A decrepit white van lacking windows, a Subaru fitted with bike racks, and a small blue sedan. My first observation fell to the van, parked farthest from the trailhead, crookedly positioned in its spot. Its back bumper hung off, and it appeared to have gone unstirred for years. Instinctively, I sensed discomfort. A guy leaned against it smoking a cigarette. He wore dirty jeans, a torn flannel shirt, and heavy boots. Clearly someone who hadn't showered in a week. He seemed to be doing nothing but observing the visitors arriving with a hard, unwavering stare that didn't falter when our eyes met. There was no smile or nod. He simply continued watching, almost as if waiting for something specific. I had 1 foot out of the car when I noticed how unnervingly still he was. Not relaxed, but rather tense, as if repressing something. My instincts kicked in, and I felt the adrenaline rise in my gut. I kept glancing over, pretending to search for my water bottle. I briefly considered leaving, and even shut my car door again for a moment. Yet, having driven all that distance, I was determined. With the day free and amid fatigue from a rough ER shift without sleep, I couldn't forgo my run. I locked the doors and ventured onto the trail, picking up my pace faster than usual. The initial stretch of the trail dipped into dense woods for 2 miles before opening up into a larger, rockier expanse near a stream. Trees crowded together, making it possible to hear other hikers sometimes, but they remained out of sight. I aimed to concentrate on the rhythm of my breath and feet while trying to shoo away the encroaching tension in my shoulders. Nevertheless, I instinctively checked behind me every couple hundred feet, spotting nothing. No sounds aside from the delightful chorus of birds and the wind sifting through the trees. Roughly 20 minutes in, I reached the switchback where the forest opened slightly. I slowed to a jog and halted to sip water, just as the volume of shouting reached my ears. Initially, it was faint, merely a single voice echoing through the trees. I assumed it was fellow hikers calling to one another or someone looking for a lost dog. But gradually, the harshness intensified, its tempo uneven and frantic. It wasn't normal words, simply sounds. Then suddenly, loud, rapid footfalls thundered behind me, pounding against the dirt. I spun around, and there he was, the man from the parking lot, charging down the trail at full speed, weaving between trees, as if he were intimately familiar with the path. His arms flailed rather erratically, but it bordered on the manic than out of control. But what truly made my throat tighten was the weapon in his hand. It looked like a long, jagged stick, resembling a broken hiking pole sharpened to a point. He swung it as he ran, yelling incoherently. The ground felt as if it had dropped away beneath me. I didn't linger to determine his motives. I turned and sprinted faster. My legs weren't ready for this, though. They complained as I forced them forward at full speed. My heart raced with a surge of terror, and I didn't dare look back, but I could hear him coming. The rhythm of his footsteps bounced around as he stumbled, picked himself up, and accelerated again. I bolted downhill past a trail marker where I typically slow down, pumping my arms, gasping for breath. My shoes skidded on the dirt and needles beneath. Then came a loud crack behind me, maybe a branch breaking or something slamming into a tree. Still, I didn't dare glance back. I steered myself towards the clearing ahead, which opened into a meadow. I could double back there or head towards the ranger station if need be. My side cramped and my chest pounded, yet I pressed on. His shouts intensified, growing more frantic as time passed. Suddenly, it quieted. No more footsteps. I kept running, pushing myself, but he seemed surprisingly fast for someone who appeared as unkempt as he was. He tore through the underbrush, seemingly without concern for pain or fatigue. The stick now loomed large in my vision, metal and jagged, affixed to a thick wooden grip. It shifted in my mind from being a stick to something crafted for one purpose alone, to inflict harm. He continued hollering nonsense, a tangled mix of half-formed sentences about betrayal and being surveilled. In a panic, I veered sharply off the main trail into an uncharted slope. I had no idea where it might lead, but I had no alternative. The primary path was far too open and predictable. The densely packed forest bore down on me, branches slapping at my face and thorny bushes snagging at my pants. I could still feel him close behind, far too close for comfort, but the thick brush constrained his speed as well. I ducked under a fallen tree, scrapping my arm against its bark, but kept running without a glance back, my adrenaline overriding all else. For an instant, I lost his sounds. The crashing of underbrush faded, replaced by the gusting wind and my uneven breaths. I knew he hadn't surrendered. He remained nearby, just quieter now. I spotted a narrow game trail bending left and took it. The path seemed deer-traveled, tight and pressed down. I followed it, heart pounding, arms shielding against branches, a desperate wish to wander back toward the road or at least inch closer to the parking lot. Without a map or phone, my device had died earlier that morning, and I had planned on charging it once I returned. I felt a wave of regret wash over me. I then heard another shout, unnervingly close. He was pursuing me, his voice growing more primal. It morphed into a terrifying growl mixed with incoherent phrases. "They're not going to trick me. They sent you." His murmur was far too near now, too chilling. I gunned it, my lungs screaming as the trail inclined. Something within me recognized the ridge I had crossed earlier. I might be nearing the fire road or the parking turnout. My determination accelerated. I charged faster, legs on autopilot, until I spied a clearing through the trees. Sunlight beamed through the branches, momentarily blinding me as I burst open onto gravel. The parking lot. My car was still there, empty and secure, 40 to 50 yards away. Without a backward glance, I bolted, my shoes thumping hard against the gravel, keys clasped tightly in my hand. I was struggling to catch proper breath, my chest constricted, and trembling hands nearly dropped the keys. After recapturing them, I rushed to unlock the door, jamming the key into the lock. I twisted it and dove into the driver's seat, slamming the door and locking it, nerves on edge. As soon as the engine rumbled to life, I glanced up, scanning the tree line. Nothing was visible, yet I felt him back there, lurking somewhere. Without hesitation, I hit reverse, backed out quickly, and drove away onto the access road, disregarding any other vehicles. I didn't stop until I reached the highway. 20 minutes later, I pressed into the local ranger station, summarizing the harrowing events in rushed sentences. They took my account seriously, quickly compiling backup and notifying law enforcement. I shared all details within my grasp, his appearance, his utterances, and the makeshift weapon. When they found him just 2 hours later, only half a mile from where I had strayed off the primary path, he sat beneath a tree, cradling the spear while lost in his thoughts. The ranger said he didn't resist arrest and barely acknowledged the responders. He merely muttered about all the people inside his head. They took him into custody without any incident. As it turned out, he was a 41-year-old man with a history of multiple mental health conditions, not having a fixed address. He had been residing in the park for weeks, utilizing abandoned shelters and caves. The contents in his bag included syringes, pills, crushed powder, and some survival gear. Yet what resonated with me was the ranger's striking comment. That man could have easily killed someone today. Regardless of his weaponry, I still run, for it's essential for alleviating the stress of my work. However, I confine myself to busier trails now, urban parks where I can find people. I carry a charged phone and a small knife on my waistband, park close to entrances, and avoid deeper woods alone. Because sometimes, it's not the wilderness that can harm you, it's what's already concealed within it. During the spring break of my junior year in college, 6 of us, myself, Brad, Kevin, Jessica, Madison, and Trevor, decided to go on a hiking adventure in the canyons of Arizona. We had been fervently planning this getaway since December, hoping to escape from the hustle and bustle of classes and people, just seeking a week immersed in nature without phones, internet, or any obligations. Trevor had the maps. Madison was responsible for packing the food, while Kevin insisted on bringing along a drone. I managed to gather the water filtration equipment. We believed ourselves to be prepared, but we weren't. We set off early that Monday morning, driving for 4 hours from campus, and then another 2 through unmarked back roads until reaching the trailhead. A handful of other vehicles filled the parking lot, but nothing overwhelming. After signing in, we loaded our packs and set off on the hike. The terrain was rugged yet stunning. Layered red sandstone, towering rock walls, and dried riverbeds stretched through the desert like veins across an alien landscape. After hiking for a few hours, we stumbled upon an old fence, intact but weathered, with a series of signs warning us every few feet. Restricted area, US government property, unauthorized access prohibited, and danger, do not enter. The fencing was roughly chest high and continued out of sight in both directions. It's probably abandoned, Trevor suggested. This stuff's been here for ages. You think the government actually keeps an eye on this place during spring break? Kevin readily agreed, saying, "Who cares? What are the chances they care? It's likely just an old military training zone." Before anyone could raise objections, Trevor threw his pack over the fence and began climbing over. Brad shot me a hesitant glance before following him. Jessica appeared uneasy, while Madison kept quiet but joined the others. I didn't want to be the one left behind, so I climbed over last. Once on the other side, we felt as though we had entered a different dimension. The path narrowed, twisting between steep canyon walls. The air felt drier and more still, with the light shifting subtly, providing a duller and more muted quality. Trevor kept pointing out odd rock formations resembling faces or symbols as Kevin attempted to fly his drone ahead, though the signal kept dropping. After about 6 hours of trekking deeper into the canyons, we only stopped a few times for short breaks. The further we ventured, the more disorienting the landscape became. Everything seemed the same: red walls, dry washes, and sparse scrub. Eventually, we recognized we hadn't encountered any usual markers for hours. Madison's GPS app failed, my compass spun restlessly in erratic circles, and Kevin's drone wouldn't connect at all. "Where the hell are we?" Brad asked, breaking the eerie silence. No one had an answer. Trevor attempted to retrace our steps, but every canyon looked identical. Jessica pulled out a printed map, only to flip it upside down, sideways, and back again. "Nothing lines up," she muttered, her voice shaking. We should have stuck to the marked trail. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows between the rocks, the temperature began to plummet. A disagreement erupted between Brad and Trevor. Brad complained we never should have crossed the fence, while Trevor insisted he was overreacting. Kevin attempted to mediate, but no one was listening. Eventually, we agreed on finding a flat area between 2 boulders and set up camp. No one was willing to press on into the dark. Madison began unpacking the tents while I boiled water. The atmosphere was tense and uneasy. Jessica sat nearby, her knees pulled up tight and anxiously chewing on her thumb, while Brad stared off into the distance, lost in thought. The silence felt oppressive. We managed to start a small fire with dry twigs and brush, but it quickly faded. Kevin switched on a headlamp, prompting everyone else to encourage him to turn it off. Its light danced too much across the rocks and cast unsettling shadows. So we huddled in the darkness, consuming protein bars and sipping hot water. It felt like we were all waiting for someone else to voice the concerns we were all thinking. Eventually, Trevor broke the quiet. "We'll head back at first light. We'll retrace the steps," Jessica questioned, her tone tense. "What if we can't?" "We will," Trevor stated too hastily. Brad abruptly stood, walking a little way off, staring into the canyon beyond. "You don't know that," he challenged. "You got us into this mess." I feared they would come to blows, but Madison stepped between them, raising her hands. "Stop. Just stop." We all lay down soon after. Kevin set his phone to beep hourly, intending to keep track of time in case someone fell asleep. I couldn't sleep, not really. I heard whispers low and fast from Brad toward Madison, while Trevor paced outside the tent. I caught the faint sounds of Jessica quietly crying, each noise feeling unbearably loud. I sat up, heart racing, thinking I heard something just beyond the tent fabric. But when I looked out, it was only the empty canyon before me, shadows stretching across arid ground. The long night felt interminable. The following morning, we packed up in silence. Although no one mentioned Trevor initially, we all glanced in the direction he had walked away towards. "We need to find him," Brad said briskly, stuffing his gear into his pack. Jessica looked pale and exhausted. bloodshot eyes betraying her weariness. "We have no idea where we are," she responded, her voice strained. Madison knelt beside her, trying to calm her down, but to no avail. Once more, Kevin proposed a direction. "We head east where the sun rises. At least we'll be moving in a single direction." "No," Brad snapped. "We need to go south. That's where the truck is parked." Everything we passed was south. Kevin stepped forward, tension rising between them. "You don't know that." "You've been wrong already." They almost stood nose to nose by this point, so I intervened. "Enough!" "We'll never locate the fence if we keep arguing." Madison was openly sobbing into her hoodie by now, while Jessica appeared to be hyperventilating, her chest rising and falling too quickly, her hands flailing as if grasping for air. I grasped her arm, walking her away from the group as I encouraged her to breathe more calmly. After some effort, she managed to recover, but words eluded her. We attempted to walk for hours, but the sun blazed relentlessly, and the heat worsened our plight. Kevin, following yet another dispute, declared, "I'm going to find Trevor. You all can remain here and die." Before we could react, he dashed down a steep ravine. Brad and I tried to follow him, yet before long we lost sight of him behind some rocks. We kept calling his name, but it merely echoed back, our voices lost in the vastness of the canyons. Eventually we gave up and turned back. Upon returning to camp, it was evident Kevin had vanished too. Jessica sat on the ground, staring blankly into the distance, while Madison appeared dazed and parched, her lips cracked. "He said he was going to look for Trevor," Jessica mumbled. "He left about an hour after you did." Now we were down to 4 and in a dire situation. Brad asserted we must keep moving, proclaiming that remaining in place could spell disaster. Madison implored us to stay put, suggesting that someone would come looking. We reached a compromise, ascending to a higher rocky ledge to survey the area for clues. All we saw was an endless expanse filled with ridges and stone walls. We called out for Kevin and Trevor until our voices lost strength, yet nothing responded. As the sunset neared, we still hadn't found anything. No tracks, no signs, no discernible escape route. That evening, as we huddled beneath a rocky overhang, we noticed distant tiny lights moving across a valley, search helicopters, spotlights sweeping across the canyon in sweeping motions. Brad jumped up, waving his flashlight vigorously. I did the same, yelling and flashing SOS signals with our beams, but everything remained unchanged. The helicopters drifted off to the east and vanished behind the rocks. None of us found rest. We were dehydrated and dizzy, too dry to even shed tears. The next day, Madison collapsed, with lips pale and trembling hands. Jessica lay flat on her back, barely blinking, arms lying motionless across her chest like she anticipated something dire. I shared my last drops of water with them, while Brad and I tried our best to shield them from the sun. By noon, I was unable to keep my footing. The heat intensified, causing the rocks to shimmer, and my throat felt as if it was tearing with every swallow. I lost consciousness of the rescue team's arrival, only remembering a voice unfamiliar to me, followed by hands lifting me and the cold sensation of water splashed onto my face. After that, I fell into darkness. When I finally resurfaced, I found myself lying on a cot, IV tubes in both arms. A paramedic asked for my name and reassured me it was over and that they had found us. We were fortunate people. Trevor's body was discovered 3 days later, located at the base of a ravine, his backpack in shambles and his body badly injured from the fall. They suspected he must have tripped while climbing. As for Kevin, he was never found. No footprints, no gear, nothing was left behind. Later on, during my recovery, the rescue chief informed us we had wandered into an active artillery area. Although the government had temporarily closed it for spring break, training exercises had resumed while we were lost in the canyons. This explained the malfunctioning GPS and the vanishing trail markers. We had no business being where we were. Kevin's family held a funeral without a casket, only displaying pictures. Jessica dropped out of school 2 months afterward, while Madison stopped responding to texts. Brad moved elsewhere, and we no longer communicated. There seemed to be nothing left to say. Every once in a while, I dream of that red rock landscape accompanied by silence, hearing the echoes of our voices bouncing off canyon walls, calling out names that remained unanswered. People romanticize the idea of breaking the rules, but it's not bravery. It's wagering lives you're unprepared to lose. I understand this now. I wish we all had. At 28, My group of 6 friends had upheld a tradition of camping every summer in the Colorado mountains. We used the same secluded spot each time, void of cell service and people, just us and the woods. This yearly retreat was something we anticipated, as it was one of the few occasions we could collectively disconnect from our various lives and distractions. 5 years of flawless camping had led us to that point. That year, Brian asked if he could bring someone new, his co-worker, Tyler. Tyler had recently moved to Colorado and lacked a social circle. He was around our age, and Brian thought a break from work stress would benefit him. We were indifferent about bringing someone new, as it had generally worked out with previous friends. Brian assured us Tyler was an all-right guy, albeit slightly intense, but nothing we couldn't handle. As per custom, I took along my hunting rifle. We had never needed it, but we had encountered a few bears in the past, making it a prudent measure. We parked at the trailhead, loaded our gear, and trekked a few miles into the woods. At first, Tyler struck us as likable, but he monopolized the conversation, sharing an endless stream of tales about fights he had been involved in, skirmishes, and incidents from back home where he had beaten people up. Initially, we nodded along, perhaps assuming he was just trying to assert his toughness. The rest of us kept the tone more relaxed, discussing work, movies, and personal matters. But Tyler consistently returned to violent narratives, how he dealt with disrespectful individuals, or how he almost broke someone's jaw for inadvertently bumping into him at a bar. The mood began to feel slightly uncomfortable. On our first evening, we got the fire roaring, pitched our tents, cooked our meals, and enjoyed a few drinks. Tyler drank the most. While he didn't appear sloppy, his volume increased. He started to yell his stories rather than just recount them. At one point, he asked each of us whether we had ever been in a real fight, chuckling derisively when one of my friends mentioned he had never fought before. "Figures," Tyler remarked softly. We brushed it off, understanding we were here to de-stress. Yet that particular edge in his voice stuck with me. It didn't seem purely funny. The following morning was mostly quiet. After a hike, we prepared breakfast and took in the views. Tyler remained subdued throughout the day, but whenever he spoke, it was often imbued with veiled aggression. Remarks like, "Bet I could survive out here all on my own," or "You know how easy it would be to disappear out here," kept cropping up. He fell behind the group, charging ahead as if racing. We remained silent, sharing the same unsettling vibe that something was amiss. Saturday night really took a turn for the worse. As we gathered around the fire, passing around a bottle of whiskey, Tyler had significantly more than the rest of us. Once again, he grew loud, tossing honed jokes that felt far more menacing than humorous. He started insinuating dark things about our girlfriends and wives, posing the question, "You ever think what your girls do while you're away? Do you really think they aren't out with someone else?" It escalated further when he targeted one of our friends' wives, demeaning her, asking if we shared our women. No one laughed, and eventually, one of us finally interjected, telling him to stop. Suddenly, his laughter rang loud and harsh, insisting we were being too sensitive. We moved past it, attempting to switch subjects, but he would simply return to the theme, hurling crass remarks aimed at each one of us as if taunting us to react. Brian, who had invited him, stepped in, trying to diffuse the mounting tension. "Hey man," he said, "maybe just chill out. You've had a lot to drink." Tyler swung around, matching his intensity. "Don't you dare tell me what to do. You're not in charge of me." His laughter wasn't the kind that would put anyone at ease. Instead, he leaned back, casting a look around the group as if daring one of us to retaliate. He then remarked, "What a bunch of soft guys sitting around a fire pretending this is therapy." We sat there, frozen and silent, the crackling of the fire the only backdrop to the thick tension. Tyler abruptly stood, shoving Brian forcefully in the chest, sending him tumbling to the ground. Brian quickly got up and demanded that Tyler leave immediately. But Tyler remained unfazed, laughing roughly before throwing a punch that Brian narrowly dodged. In an instant, he lunged at Tyler, tackling him to the ground as they both fell beside the fire pit, fists swinging and feet kicking sparks into the air. The rest of us rushed in to pull them apart before things escalated any further. Tyler started to scream, slurring his words. His eyes widened, veins bulging at his neck. He flailed violently, vowing he would kill us all, snarling, "I'll end all of you," as he spit and roared. At that moment, I noticed his hand retreating towards his jacket pocket. He fumbled around for a moment before pulling out a folding knife, flicking it open with one hand, shouting, You want some? Come and get it!" while backing up towards the fire, brandishing the weapon menacingly. We all remained silent, collectively stepping back. I sprinted toward my tent, hurriedly zipping it open, and grabbed my rifle. I chambered around as I made my way back toward the fire, pointing it at him, not uttering a word. I didn't have to. The moment Tyler spotted the gun, his demeanor shifted entirely. The aggression fell away as if a mask had slipped from his face. His arms rose, and the knife dropped to the dirt. "Don't shoot," he stammered. "I'm sorry. I'm done, okay? I didn't mean it, I swear." His voice became high-pitched and quivering, akin to a child caught breaking a treasured item. He fell to his knees, hands still raised. I kept the rifle trained at his chest as my friends moved in to kick the knife away. Brian picked it up while another friend checked his pockets. Nothing else. Tyler knelt there, trembling, tears streaming down his cheeks, mumbling, "I didn't mean it." He pleaded, "It's the alcohol, man." "I'm sorry. Don't call the cops, please." I gave him a strict ultimatum. He had 10 minutes to pack his things and leave without uttering another word. If he lingered past the 10-minute window, I would call the Rangers. He didn't argue, shakily rising as if his legs were made of rubber. Hesitantly, he stumbled back to his tent, glancing recurrently at the rifle, a concern evident in his eyes. He hastily stuffed his belongings, his sleeping bag, clothes, bottle, into his pack, operating in pure adrenaline. 5 minutes later, he was gone, backpack slung over one shoulder as he crashed through the underbrush. Once he left, we remained around the fire, uttering few words. We only listened while the forest drank in the sounds of his departure. The following morning, silence blanketed us. The preceding night's events left us wired, tired, and with lingering tension. Before breaking camp, we decided to inspect Tyler's tent site. We didn't find much left behind, yet his jeans lay outside, soaked through, especially in the crotch area. None of us had noticed it happen, but it was unmistakable. He had lost control when I pointed the rifle at him. That moment felt uncanny. None of us laughed. A quiet seriousness prevailed, enveloping the air as we processed the gravity of Tyler's unhinged outburst. Brian stared at the jeans for what felt like an eternity. "I had no idea," he muttered. "I thought he was just some loudmouth." He confessed that while they worked together, he didn't really know the guy. "I didn't know he was like this." He repeated apologies, but none of us held him responsible. He hadn't intended for things to escalate the way they did, yet we all acknowledged the underlying change in atmosphere. It was no longer solely about Tyler. It now encompassed a broader concern regarding the unpredictability of people and how things transformed rapidly when unfamiliar individuals were introduced. We packed up in silence, the mood dramatically altered from previous trips. Nobody lingered. We hurriedly made our way back toward our vehicles, eager to drive back to town. On our descent, we discussed measures we could implement moving forward. In the future, no more additional guests unless the entire group was familiar with them. No more assumptions. We needed to evade finding ourselves in such jeopardous scenarios again. Having to restrain someone, witnessing a glinting knife in the firelight, standing there with a loaded rifle after someone unwittingly introduced a volatile character. In the end, we never reported the incident. No physical injuries emerged, nothing quantifiable occurred, but it left its imprint. Whenever we made plans for future trips, someone eventually brought it up. "Remember Tyler?" They would prompt, and collectively, we nodded, our expressions reflective. We maintained the tradition, but we were far more cautious after. That trip was meant to serve as an escape from it all. Instead, it reminded us just how swiftly one's sense of safety can dissolve when you don't know who you're allowing into your circle. Although Tyler had departed, he left behind more than just some damp jeans. He imparted a haunting reminder, one we would never forget. I was broke, disinterested, and weary of whatever life I'd been living back home. So when a friend of a friend mentioned they needed additional help mapping out some land in the middle of nowhere, I didn't ponder it too deeply. The pay was decent, and the notion of being unplugged for a couple of months seemed appealing. What I didn't understand then, what none of us truly grasped, was that the further you venture into those woods, the less it feels like a place you're merely visiting and more like something is watching you, weighing the decision of whether or not to let you leave. The hike in took almost the entire day. We began early in the morning, our packs loaded, following Tom, the crew leader, along a narrow trail that barely existed. Each step plunged us deeper into the woods, thick trees obscuring the sun, until it felt as if we were wandering inside a locked cabinet, with no cell signal, no noise, and no signs of other people. It was breathtaking in a manner that lacked comfort, the kind of beauty that seems indifferent to your presence. We finally made camp on a flat ridge spacious enough to pitch 4 tents around a fire pit that Tom had used on prior trips. The ridge provided a bit of space, but still the forest encircled us tightly, filled with pine and laurel. Trees leaned against each other, their roots twisting through the earth as if attempting to claim every inch. Gazing up revealed only thin ribbons of sky. The silence was so profound that I found myself holding my breath unwittingly. Initially, I didn't recognize the strange tension creeping into my shoulders. It never truly lifted. I kept anticipating sounds from birds or insects, yet there was nothing but the 4 of us attempting to pretend everything was normal. Our crew was small. Tom, possibly in his mid-50s, had undertaken jobs like this all over the country. Calm and efficient, he always carried a compass as if it were part of him. The 2 other guys, Eli and Mason, were around my age. Eli hailed from Arkansas, lean and wiry, perpetually chewing sunflower seeds, often talking about some girl he nearly proposed to. Mason was quieter and more contemplative, always writing in a journal, treating instant coffee as if it was sacred. We were strangers before the job, yet out there, we had no choice but to rely on one another. That first night around the fire, Tom explained our tasks, marking property lines, flagging trees, logging GPS coordinates. It was straightforward work. The land didn't technically have an owner. He'd mentioned some old boundary dispute or perhaps forgotten paperwork. We weren't meant to talk to anyone about it. Simply get the job done and head home. I found it slightly shady, yet honestly, it didn't bother me. This felt manageable. Physical work without any bosses hovering over my shoulder and no phone vibrating in my pocket. For the first time in a while, I felt like I could just exist. The first couple of days progressed like usual. We woke early, consumed oatmeal or granola bars, and set out with flagging tape and handheld GPS devices. The work was repetitive. Find a tree, flag it, log the point, move on, creating a rhythm and focus that allowed me to tune out what was happening outside the woods. Then, something shifted. On our 3rd morning, we discovered the trail we had cut the previous day was strangely off. We spent hours hacking through dense laurel, tying red tape every 10 yards or so to mark our path. It had been fresh work, torn branches, footprints marking the loose earth, and shirts sodden with sweat. But when we attempted to retrace our route the following morning, our flagging tape had disappeared. Not just fallen off, but completely gone. No scraps remained, no strings left behind, no knots tied around trunks. The trail itself appeared different as well, looking as if it had been there for years. The branches we had cut seemed weathered. Our boot prints had faded. Everything felt ancient. Tom squinted at the trees and muttered, "Maybe wind took the tape or maybe animals." Yet his voice didn't quite align with his words. He looked like someone reluctant to objectify the reality he was witnessing. I remember Mason crouching near one of the flagged trees, running his fingers over the bark, saying quietly, "This isn't just a few hours of regrowth. This looks healed." Nobody responded. We pushed on, yet from that moment onward, a palpable change settled among us. Conversation faded, the laughter dissipated. Even Eli, usually chatty, confined his attention to himself. One afternoon, I spotted him casually chewing sunflower seeds, completely transfixed by the trees, as if he were listening for something that eluded our senses. Then my tent shifted. After a long day surveying a low, wet section of the woods, we returned to camp. The fire still smoldered from the previous morning, and everything appeared untouched, except for my tent. It had been moved several feet closer to the fire pit. It was neither dragged nor in disarray, merely relocated, neat and precise, as if it had always belonged there. I inspected the surrounding ground. No drag marks, no footprints, undisturbed dirt beneath. The scene made zero sense. I asked the others if they'd altered its position. Tom simply stated, "No." Mason shook his head. Eli cast a look as if to say he would prefer I drop the topic. That night, I lay awake, staring at the top of my tent, ruminating on how careful the movement had been, as if something or someone wanted to convey a message yet didn't want to frighten me, at least not yet. After that, none of us slept easily. One morning, Tom sheepishly admitted he had heard something prowling the camp at night. Not animals, he clarified. Not rustling or snapping branches, but deliberate footsteps, He recounted how they circled just beyond the firelight, pausing when he called out, only to commence from the opposite side. The following night, I decided to stay awake to listen. Around midnight, I caught it. Crunch, crunch. Long pauses followed, housing the unmistakable sound of someone walking deliberately, as if testing each step. It began to my left near Mason's tent. After a while, all went quiet. However, I heard the steps again, this time from just behind me. My heart raced, and I wished it was one of the guys taking a leak or stretching their legs. Yet somehow, I knew that wasn't the case. The pace was too slow and methodical. "Hello?" I called out softly. Silence ensued, so thick I could hear my breath. Just when I began to convince myself it was my imagination, the footsteps returned, moving around the perimeter of all our tents without making a sound. After that, I couldn't sleep. By the second to last week, the job transformed from work into an arduous fight to survive each day without succumbing to panic. The forest felt heavier, thickening around us. Distances extended longer than they should have. Landmarks morphed slightly from one day to the next. Paths walked, just the day prior, started to feel unfamiliar. Then we encountered the hollow. It was narrow, surrounded by steep hills, and packed full of thick trees. While flagging trees as normal, I suddenly realized Tom wasn't with us. I assumed he had lagged behind, so I quickened my pace to catch up with Eli and Mason at the ridge. Upon reaching the top, I found Tom standing there, appearing normal but perhaps a bit weary. He nodded at me as if nothing was wrong. Then I heard him call my name from the hollow behind me. My stomach sank. It wasn't merely similar. It was Tom's voice, the exact way he would call if he needed help. Identical pitch, rhythm, and the slight rasp. He called again, closer this time. I turned around, expecting to see only trees. Tom ahead of me mirrored my confusion, quietly stating my name, taking a step backward. That was it for us. We had no desire to stick around for another night. At dawn, we broke camp, abandoning our flagged paths and GPS logs, even some of our equipment. None of that mattered anymore. We simply took what we needed to make our escape. The forest had tolerated our presence long enough, but on that day, we sensed it shift. Jonah, my cousin, had this grand vision for the summer, something beyond the usual hikes. He wanted to delve deeper into the Appalachian backcountry than either of us had ever ventured. Real deep, past maintained trails, past places marked by cairns or old blazes, even beyond where hunters typically roam. That was Jonah for you. Always chasing something unexpressed, as if the edge of a map wasn't a limitation but a challenge. I was more of the type who liked secure access to food and showers, but I agreed to accompany him. I typically did. Perhaps it was his enthusiasm, or maybe just my reluctance to be the guy who turned down the invite, only to later hear that he got lost alone out there. We planned for 3 nights, packing freeze-dried meals, water filters, a compact stove, and a weatherproof tent. I brought along a GPS logger, an inconspicuous device about the size of a matchbox that maps your trail as you travel. It featured a function that allowed for reviewing the route on a small screen, or connecting it to your laptop later to overlay it on a map. I had used it before. It never failed me. On the morning of our departure, the ranger at the check-in station barely glanced up from his crossword. We signed the logbook with our names. Just before leaving, another ranger, an older fellow with a sunburnt nose who emitted a hint of tobacco, looked our way and remarked, "You boys picked land no map bothers with." His smirk was odd. It lingered in my mind. Jonah just grinned, as if someone had just complimented him, and we exited. By noon, we had abandoned the last recognizable trail. The brush closed in swiftly, and the forest began that phenomenon where it felt like it was closing ranks behind you. Thick stands of hemlock and tangles of rhododendron blocked the sun. We found ourselves scrambling up loose scree in certain areas, wading through knee-deep mud in others. Progress was slow, but Jonah didn't seem fazed. He said, "That's how you know it's real. When the land stops pretending to be convenient." That first evening, I began noticing small oddities. A tree that didn't quite fit its surroundings, moss growing in a direction misaligned with the sun. A section of hillside appeared recently disturbed, like a landslide that had occurred and been erased. I chalked it up to fatigue and soreness, as that always messes with perception. We set up camp in a hollow between 2 ridges, a nice spot with flat ground, a dense canopy overhead, and a clear little creek roughly 30 feet away for our water supply. We created a fire pit using nearby rocks and enjoyed a quiet dinner. No wildlife graced our surroundings. To speak of, no deer, squirrels, not even a raccoon attempting to infiltrate our packs. Yet it didn't feel empty, just restrained. That night, I startled awake all at once, experiencing that deep, bone-chilling alertness. No dreams, no tossing, simply conscious. It took me a moment to realize what was wrong. Silence. Not merely the absence of sound, but a dull silence pressing heavily against my ears, reminiscent of being underwater or in a vacuum. No crickets, no breeze, and no sounds of the creek. It felt like the world had muted. Slowly I sat up, pulling my blanket tightly around me. I wasn't sweating. I was frozen, which didn't make sense for the summer heat in those mountains. But the cold clung to me, sharp and dry. Jonah was still asleep. I could hear his steady breathing. I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could and stepped out. The air had that heavy pre-thunderstorm stillness, yet there were no clouds in sight. I scanned the campsite to reassure myself that everything was where we had left it. Then I noticed it. The tree line had shifted. At first, it didn't register. I was looking at the poplar that had originally been on our east side, yet now it stood behind the tent to the west, while the clump of saplings I recalled near the fire pit was missing. The fire pit itself appeared incorrect. The rocks were scattered, no ash present, no charred wood, merely disturbed dirt, as if we hadn't built anything there at all. Reaching for my phone to check the time, it was dead, no response, not even the low battery screen. I pressed the power button multiple times and after holding it down, still nothing. Approaching where the creek should have been, no sound emanated, no shimmering water visible through the trees. When I finally arrived, the creek bed was dry, not damp, not merely reduced, but utterly dry. The rocks parched, the leaves undisturbed. It seemed as though water hadn't graced this ground in years. I turned to head back, and that's when I saw it. A pale light rising from the forest floor. Not moonlight, not even close. It was low, cold, and flickered in strange places, as though the ground dipped in unexpected manners. It moved, not flickering, not swaying, but as if alive, sliding around the roots and tree trunks, intent on not being fully revealed. The air vibrated. I could feel it in my teeth. An unsettling, broken hum layered under a high-pitched whine, reminiscent of an old engine attempting to start after years in a garage. I backed away toward the tent, though something shifted within the light. I froze, confronted by a shape. Tall, really tall, long but not quite human. Its proportions seemed off. Too elongated in certain areas, too short in others. It didn't walk, but jerked forward in small bursts. With each movement, the light around it distorted slightly. My instincts kicked in. I turned and ran up the slope, but the slope wasn't there. My foot landed on what should have been solid ground, and I fell hard, but didn't crash into anything. Just dropped, as if gravity had momentarily released me. Cold air rushed past. I couldn't breathe or scream, flailing my arms in vain, unable to find anything to grip. Then, nothing. I awoke to the sound of my alarm, the digital chirp I had set before falling asleep. I found myself back in the tent, wrapped in my sleeping bag with Jonah snoring beside me. Sunlight filtered through the nylon, and the creek happily rushed nearby, lively once more. I exited slowly, assessing the campsite. The fire pit was intact. The same rocks in place. Charred wood blackened. Even a bit of unburned marshmallow still on a stick. Everything appeared untouched, except it wasn't. I retrieved my GPS tracker, checked the overnight log, running just as I left it. But the data told a vastly different story. There had been multiple restarts between midnight and 3 a.m., as if someone had been turning it off and on repeatedly. Then, nothing. A complete void. 3 hours of missing data. I didn't mention it to Jonah. I silently headed down to the creek, where I discovered the worst part. A perfectly straight strip of bone-dry ground, about 4 feet wide, running parallel to the water, leaves brittle and unbent with no moisture whatsoever. It was as if something immense had passed through, only to vanish without a trace. We hurriedly packed up. Jonah didn't question why, his movements suggesting he sensed something too. We made our way back to the ranger station by early evening, not uttering much along the hike out. We simply kept walking. I thought I might be losing my grip on reality, that it could have all been some kind of dream or hallucination from a lack of sleep. Then the following morning, over breakfast, Jonah looked at me and said, "Hey, did you smell it?" I was taken aback. He rubbed his arms, scrunching his face as if recalling burnt marshmallows, sweet and strangely chemical. The odor lingered across my clothes when I woke up. He didn't know I had sensed it too. Despite washing my shirt twice, the scent clung to me. We never returned,